The afternoon sun filtered through the windows of the 42nd floor, painting golden streaks across the elegant offices of Metropolitan Investment Bank in the heart of Manhattan's financial district. The aroma of gourmet coffee mixed with expensive perfume floating in the air conditioning, while executives in impeccable suits walked across polished marble with steps that echoed like drums of power. In the main reception area, nervousness was palpable. Employees exchanged anxious glances while adjusting their ties and smoothing their dresses. The moment they all dreaded had arrived. The visit of the most important German investor of the year, Heinrich Müller, whose decision to invest 50 million euros could change the future of the institution. But something had gone terribly wrong. The distinguished man with grey hair and a navy blue suit stood in the center of the elegant lobby, with an expression mixing frustration and bewilderment. His words in German bounced off the glass walls without finding echo. The receptionists desperately tried to communicate in basic English, but each failed attempt increased the tension in the atmosphere. A few meters away, almost invisible among the ornamental plants and quiet corners, a middle-aged woman discreetly pushed her cleaning cart. Grace Martinez was 52 years old, hands rough from work and tired eyes that had seen too much. Her worn blue uniform contrasted dramatically with the luxury surrounding her, but in her gaze there was something few had noticed, a spark of intelligence and understanding that held a valuable secret. While observing the scene unfolding before her, Grace understood every word coming from the German investor's lips. The years she had lived in Berlin, working as a nurse before life brought her back to America, had engraved the language in her memory like a hidden treasure she had never had the opportunity to show. The chaos grew, murmurs multiplied, the investor's frustration intensified with each passing second, and then Grace made a decision that would change her life forever. If this story is touching something inside you, let us know from which country you're watching. Your support motivates us to keep sharing stories that remind us of the value we all carry within. Heinrich Müller had crossed half the world to reach this moment. At 63, he was considered one of Europe's shrewdest investors, a man who had built his fortune by identifying opportunities where others only saw cold numbers. But now, standing in this elegant New York lobby, he felt completely disarmed. His flight from Frankfurt had been long and turbulent. Jet lag weighed on his shoulders like a damp blanket, and all he wanted was to conclude this crucial meeting so he could rest. He had come to New York with a specific proposal: invest 50 million euros in the energy sector, but he needed to review complex technical documents and discuss very specific terms that required absolute precision. The problem was that his English, although functional for basic conversations, wasn't sufficient for negotiations of this magnitude. He had specifically requested a German-Spanish interpreter, but apparently the bank had underestimated this need. "Entschuldigung, ich brauche jemanden, der Deutsch spricht," he repeated over and over, watching how the faces before him filled with perplexity. The main receptionist, an elegant young woman no older than 25, tried to maintain professional composure while cold sweats ran down her back. She had studied English at a private school, had taken business protocol courses, but never imagined she would face a situation like this. "Sir, we are trying to, find someone who speaks German," she stammered, while her colleagues made desperate calls to translation agencies. Heinrich observed everything with a mixture of patience that was quickly running out and a deep sadness he knew well. It was the same feeling of isolation he had experienced decades ago, when he was a young immigrant in London, struggling to make himself understood in a foreign language. The difference was that now he had power and money, but still felt completely alone. Minutes dragged like hours, Bank executives began arriving, their faces reflecting the same anxiety. They knew what was at stake. This wasn't just another client. It was the opportunity to save the financial quarter and possibly their own jobs. The general director, a corpulent 50-year-old man named Robert Sterling, appeared sweating profusely despite the air conditioning. "Herr Müller, we are so sorry for this inconvenience," he stammered in English that sounded more like a desperate apology than professional communication. Heinrich felt a stab of compassion toward these men who were clearly doing their best. But he also felt the weight of responsibility. His partners in Germany expected a detailed report of this meeting. The shareholders of his investment fund had placed their trust in his judgment. He couldn't afford misunderstandings or decisions based on poor communication. The tension in the atmosphere was so dense it seemed the air itself had become heavy. Phones rang constantly while employees desperately searched for a solution. Some murmured among themselves in Spanish, which only increased the German investors' sense of isolation. Heinrich looked at his watch. He had been in this situation for 20 minutes already. His next meetings would start to be delayed. Patience, a virtue he had cultivated during decades of international business, was beginning to crumble. He walked toward one of the elegant lobby chairs and sat down, crossing his hands over his Italian leather briefcase. His expression had changed from initial frustration to melancholic resignation. He was a man accustomed to controlling situations, to finding efficient solutions, but now he felt completely vulnerable. And it was in that moment of apparent defeat when something unexpected was about to happen, something that none of those present could have imagined. Grace Martinez had learned to be invisible. In the 3 years she had been working at Metropolitan Investment Bank, she had perfected the art of moving through the shadows of power, cleaning the spaces where decisions affecting thousands of people were made without anyone noticing her presence. But her invisibility hadn't always been like this. 25 years ago, Grace was a young, 27-year-old nurse who had made the bravest decision of her life: immigrate to Germany in search of better opportunities. America was going through a severe economic recession, and she, recently graduated from university, watched her dreams fade away among the lack of jobs and miserable salaries in the healthcare sector. With her savings and support from an aunt living in Berlin, Grace had crossed the ocean carrying only a suitcase and fierce determination. The first years in Germany were brutal. She worked 12 hours daily in a hospital while studying German at night, sleeping barely 4 hours and eating nothing but bread and coffee. But there was something magical about those days of struggle. Each German word she learned was a small victory. Each patient she cared for smiled gratefully at her, regardless of her accent or grammatical errors. She had fallen in love with the language, with its precision, with its ability to express complex emotions with a single compound word. For 15 years, Grace had been respected and loved at Berlin University Hospital. She spoke German fluently, had developed deep friendships, had a small but cozy apartment near Central Park. She had found her place in the world. But life has cruel ways of changing course. Her mother became seriously ill in America. Grace returned to care for her, thinking it would only be for a few months. But months turned into years, and when her mother died, Grace found herself facing a devastating reality. At 50, without professional connections in America and with credentials that weren't easily recognized, getting work as a nurse had become nearly impossible. Her mother's medical debts had exhausted her German savings. The family house needed urgent repairs. Grace was forced to accept jobs she had never imagined, first as a domestic employee, then as a retail worker, until she finally found employment at the bank. Every morning, at exactly 5 o'clock, Grace woke up in her small studio apartment in Queens. She showered with cold water because she didn't have a heater, dressed in her blue uniform that she hand-washed every night, and took the subway and bus to reach the financial district where she worked. Her routine was meticulous and silent. She cleaned the executives' offices while they still slept in their luxury homes. She dusted fine wood furniture, vacuumed Persian rugs, polished the windows from where you could see the entire city. She listened to fragments of conversations in English and Spanish about million-dollar investments, corporate mergers, and market strategies. But what hurt her most wasn't the humiliation of the work she performed. What really wounded her was how she had stopped existing for others. Executives passed by her as if she were part of the furniture. Secretaries greeted her with an educated but empty smile. Managers didn't even turn to look at her. Grace had been a respected woman, a competent professional, someone whose opinions mattered. Now she was just a shadow that appeared and disappeared, keeping clean a world she no longer belonged to. In the afternoons, when she returned to her apartment, sometimes she put on headphones and listened to German music. She closed her eyes and remembered conversations with her colleagues at the hospital, shared laughter in the break room, the sense of purpose she felt each time she saved a life or consoled a family. Her German remained perfect. Sometimes, while cleaning, she listened to German documentaries on her old phone. She read Berlin news on the internet when she had enough data. She kept that language alive like a secret treasure, hoping someday to have the opportunity to use it again. That opportunity was about to arrive, although Grace didn't know it yet. While pushing her cart toward the reception to clean the ornamental plants, she clearly heard the desperate words of the German man. Entschuldigung, ich brauche jemanden, der Deutsch spricht. Her heart accelerated. For the first time in 3 years, someone needed exactly what she could offer. Time seemed to stop. Grace felt her heart beating so hard she feared everyone in the lobby could hear it. The German words from the investor resonated in her mind like a familiar melody she had been waiting to hear for years. For a few seconds that felt eternal, Grace remained motionless next to her cleaning cart. Part of her, the part that had learned to stay invisible, whispered that she should continue with her work, not get into trouble, that it wasn't her place to intervene. After all, what would her supervisors think? What would the executives say if a simple cleaning employee dared to interrupt such a delicate situation? But another part of her, the part that had been a nurse in Berlin, the part that had helped German patients feel less alone in moments of vulnerability, couldn't bear to see another human being in that same situation of isolation and despair. Heinrich Müller had closed his eyes for a moment, massaging his temples with an expression of defeat. Grace could see in his face the same loneliness she had felt so many times. It was the face of someone completely disconnected from the world around them. And then, Grace made the bravest decision of the last 3 years of her life. With firm but discreet steps, she approached the reception area. The bank employees were so absorbed in their desperate phone calls and failed communication attempts that they didn't notice her presence. Grace stopped at a respectful distance from the German investor and, with a soft but clear voice, pronounced the words that would change everything. "Entschuldigen Sie bitte, Herr Müller. Kann ich Ihnen helfen?" The effect was instant and dramatic. Heinrich opened his eyes suddenly, his face completely transformed. The expression of frustration and fatigue was replaced by a mixture of surprise, relief, and something like gratitude. "Sie sprechen Deutsch?" he asked, with a voice slightly trembling with emotion. "Ja, ich spreche fließend Deutsch. Ich habe 15 Jahre in Berlin gelebt und gearbeitet," Grace responded, feeling how German words flowed from her lips like water after years of drought. The silence that followed was absolute. All the bank employees had stopped dead in their tracks, with phones half-dialed, looking in amazement at the woman who until that moment had been completely invisible to them. It was as if they had just witnessed a miracle. Heinrich slowly stood up, with a smile that completely illuminated his face. Das ist wunderbar. Ich bin so erleichtert. Könnten Sie mir bitte dabei helfen, mit diesen Herren zu kommunizieren? Grace nodded serenely, although inside she felt an emotion so intense she feared her legs wouldn't support her. She turned toward the general director, who was looking at her with an expression of complete bewilderment. Mr. Sterling, Grace said with a firm and professional voice that surprised everyone present. Mr. Müller says he's very relieved to be able to communicate. He wants to know if they can proceed with the meeting he had scheduled. He also mentions he needs to review some specific technical documents about the Mexican energy sector. Robert Sterling blinked several times, as if trying to process a reality that didn't fit with his understanding of the world. You speak German?" he stammered. "Yes, sir. I lived and worked in Germany for 15 years. I can translate everything you need." Heinrich intervened then, addressing Grace in German. "Bitte sagen Sie ihm, dass ich sehr beeindruckt bin von seinem Team, besonders von Ihnen. Wie heißen Sie?" Grace blushed slightly before translating. "Mr. Müller says he's very impressed with your team, especially with me. He asks what my name is." "Grace Martinez," she responded, both in Spanish and German. Heinrich extended his hand toward Grace with a gesture of deep respect. "Es ist mir eine Ehre, Sie kennenzulernen, Frau Martinez. Sie haben mir heute sehr geholfen." While Grace translated that it was an honor to meet her and that she had helped him greatly, something extraordinary began happening in the bank lobby. The employees who minutes before didn't even notice her presence now looked at her with a mixture of admiration and respect. Secretaries exchanged looks of amazement. Executives began approaching, intrigued by the unexpected turn of events. But Grace didn't let herself be carried away by the sudden attention. With the professionalism she had developed during her years as a nurse, she concentrated on doing her job, building bridges between two worlds that until that moment seemed completely disconnected. "Mr. Müller," she said in German, "would you like me to offer you something to drink while they prepare the conference room? We have imported German coffee." Heinrich smiled with genuine warmth. "Das wäre sehr nett, und bitte nennen Sie mich Heinrich." The most powerful man in the lobby had just asked the cleaning employee to call him by his first name. Grace felt that something profound had changed, not only in that room, but in her own perception of who she was and what she was worth. As she headed toward the coffee machine, she heard murmurs of admiration behind her. For the first time in 3 years, Grace Martinez had stopped being invisible. But what she didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a transformation that would change her life forever. The news spread through the bank like wildfire. In less than an hour, all the building's employees knew that the cleaning woman from the 42nd floor spoke German perfectly and had saved the most important meeting of the quarter. While Grace accompanied Heinrich Müller toward the conference room, fluently translating every technical detail of the presentation, the executives observed her with a mixture of fascination and discomfort. It was as if they had suddenly discovered that one of the lobby statues had come to life and turned out to be more intelligent than all of them combined. The meeting was a resounding success. Grace didn't just translate words. She understood complex financial concepts and was able to explain cultural nuances that facilitated communication. Heinrich was so impressed that at the end of the meeting he specifically asked that Grace be present at all his future meetings with the bank. "Diese Dame ist nicht nur eine Übersetzerin," Heinrich commented to the general director, while Grace translated. "Sie versteht wirklich, worum es geht. Das macht den Unterschied." "Mr. Müller says I'm not just a translator," Grace explained, feeling her cheeks redden. "He says I really understand what it's all about, and that makes the difference." Robert Sterling nodded enthusiastically, but Grace could perceive something strange in his expression. It was admiration mixed with something darker, a deep discomfort at the idea that a cleaning employee had turned out to be more valuable than his entire international relations department. When the meeting ended and Heinrich left with the promise to return the next day, Grace expected to return discreetly to her usual routine. But that was no longer possible. "Grace," Sterling called her while she collected the empty coffee cups, "I need to talk to you." In the general director's office, Grace sat in a chair she had never imagined she would occupy. The walls were covered with diplomas and photographs with important politicians. The solid mahogany desk was larger than her entire apartment. "I didn't know you had those abilities," Sterling began, with a tone that tried to be kind but sounded condescending. "No one ever asked me, sir. Why didn't you mention it on your job application?" Grace hesitated for a moment. How could she explain to this man that when you apply for a cleaning job, no one asks about your academic background or languages? How could she tell him that she had learned that mentioning her credentials only generated distrust or made her overqualified for jobs she desperately needed? "I thought it wasn't relevant for the work you were offering me." Sterling leaned back in his leather chair, studying her with new intensity. "Well, now it is relevant. Mr. Miller specifically asked that you work with him on his future visits. This could be very beneficial for the bank." Grace felt a knot in her stomach. In the way Sterling spoke, there was something she didn't like. It was as if she had suddenly become a useful tool, not a person with her own value. "What exactly does that mean, sir?" "It means you're going to temporarily leave your cleaning duties and work as an interpreter. Of course, you'll continue being a general services employee, but with additional responsibilities." Grace frowned. The way he presented it sounded like they were doing her a favor, when actually she had just demonstrated that she had abilities worth much more than her current salary. "And does that include a salary adjustment, sir?" The question hung in the air like a provocation. Sterling cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Well, that's something we'll have to review with human resources. For now, consider this a growth opportunity." Grace left that office with mixed feelings. On one hand, she was excited to be able to use her abilities again. On the other, she felt they were trying to take advantage of her in a subtle but clear way. But the real problems began when she returned to the service area. The other cleaning employees received her with icy silence. Hope, an older woman who had been her only friend at work, looked at her with a mixture of pain and resentment. "Do you feel very important now, don't you?" Lisa, one of the younger employees, snapped at her. "Now what? You're not going to talk to us anymore?" "It's not that, Lisa. I didn't ask for this to happen." "Of course not," Hope intervened sarcastically. "You just showed off in front of all of us. Do you know what the bosses are saying? That if a cleaning employee knows German, what else might we be hiding? Now they all look at us like we're suspicious." Grace felt the ground wobble under her feet. She hadn't considered that her moment of courage could bring negative consequences for her co-workers. "Hope, I would never do anything to hurt—" "Wouldn't you?" she interrupted. "Then why didn't you tell us you spoke German? Didn't you trust us?" The question hit Grace like a slap. It was true, painfully true. For 3 years, she had kept her past as a secret, not only out of pride, but because she had learned that people treated her differently when they knew her story. She had preferred invisibility to pity or distrust. "I was afraid," she finally admitted. "I was afraid they'd see me differently, that they'd think I believed I was better than you." "And isn't it true?" Lisa asked with tears in her eyes. "Don't you think you're better than us?" Grace was left speechless. Because deep down, a very small and very honest part of her had to admit that yes, there were moments when she felt different, when she remembered her years as a nurse and wondered how she had ended up there. But she also knew that wasn't the whole truth. "I don't think I'm better," she said finally, with a voice trembling with emotion. "I think I'm different. And that's been my problem all these years." I've spent so much time feeling out of place that I forgot we all have stories, we all have talents, we're all worth something. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with years of frustrations and postponed dreams. But the most difficult confrontation was yet to come, because while Grace tried to navigate these complicated emotional waters, a decision was being made in the executive offices that would change her life in ways she could never have imagined. Heinrich Müller hadn't only been impressed with Grace's linguistic abilities, he had recognized in her something that few in that bank seemed to have noticed: a natural intelligence, a capacity for understanding, and a personal dignity that transcended any title or position. And he was about to make a proposal that would test everything Grace believed she knew about her own worth. The next day, Grace arrived at the bank with a mixture of expectation and anxiety she hadn't felt in years. She had stayed awake all night, thinking about the conversation with her co-workers, Sterling's words, the look of respect she had seen in Heinrich Müller's eyes. For the first time in 3 years, she had dressed with special care. She didn't have elegant clothes, but she had ironed her best blouse, styled her hair differently, and used the small bottle of perfume she saved for special occasions. Heinrich was waiting for her in the reception, but this time he wasn't alone. He was accompanied by an elegant woman of about 40, wearing a black tailored suit and a professional smile. "Guten Morgen, Frau Martinez." Heinrich greeted her with genuine warmth. "Ich möchte Ihnen Frau Weber vorstellen, meine Personalmanagerin." Grace automatically translated "good morning," and that he wanted to introduce Mrs. Weber, his human resources manager. "Es ist mir eine Freude, Sie kennenzulernen," the woman said, shaking Grace's hand firmly. "Heinrich hat mir sehr viel über Sie erzählt." "She says it's a pleasure to meet me," Grace translated, feeling a strange sensation in her stomach, "and that Heinrich has told her a lot about me." Heinrich smiled and addressed Grace directly. "Grace, ich habe einen Vorschlag für Sie, aber zuerst möchte ich Ihnen etwas sagen. Gestern haben Sie nicht nur übersetzt. Sie haben Brücken gebaut. Sie haben gezeigt, was wahre Professionalität bedeutet." Grace felt her cheeks redden while she translated. "He says he has a proposal for me. But first, he wants to tell me something. That yesterday, I didn't just translate, but built bridges and showed what true professionalism means." "Was ich Ihnen anbieten möchte," Heinrich continued, "ist eine Position in meiner Firma in Deutschland. Wir brauchen jemanden wie Sie, intelligent, kultiviert und mit der Fähigkeit, zwischen verschiedenen Welten zu vermitteln." Grace's heart stopped completely. Heinrich was offering her a job in Germany, a real professional job that recognized her true capabilities. When she finished translating the proposal, the silence in reception was absolute. Sterling, who had appeared upon hearing the conversation, had an expression of total shock. Mrs. Weber intervened then, speaking in functional but clear English. "Mrs. Martinez, we have investigated your record at Berlin University Hospital. Your former supervisors speak of you with tremendous respect. The position we're offering would be as International Relations Coordinator for Latin America. The starting salary would be €60,000 annually, plus full benefits." Grace felt the world spinning around her. €60,000 annually was more money than she had seen together in her entire life. It was the opportunity to return to professional dignity, to recover the life she had lost. But it also meant leaving America again. Leaving her mother's grave, leaving the small house she had managed to repair with so much effort, leaving... "When do you need an answer?" she asked with a trembling voice. "We would like you to fly with us tomorrow," Heinrich said, "so you can see the offices, the team, and make an informed decision. If you accept, we could start the visa procedures immediately." Sterling cleared his throat loudly. "Mr. Müller, with all respect, Grace is an employee of this bank. We have a contract." Heinrich looked at him with an expression Grace had never seen before. It was the look of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Mr. Sterling," he said in perfect and cold English, "Grace works here cleaning offices for a salary that probably doesn't even cover her basic expenses. You had her talents for 3 years and never realized what you had. I don't think you're in a position to claim rights over her." Grace felt a mixture of gratitude and vertigo. For the first time in years, someone was defending her value, recognizing her dignity. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "It's a very important decision." "Of course," Heinrich responded with understanding. "But let me tell you something, Grace. I've met many people in my professional life. Few times have I found someone who combines intelligence, humility, and inner strength like you. Don't let fear prevent you from making the right decision." That afternoon, Grace sat in her small studio apartment in Queens, looking out the window at the city extending under a grey sky. In her hands, she had Heinrich Müller's business card and a phone number to confirm her decision. She also had a letter she had found in her work locker. It was from Hope. "Grace, I know yesterday I said harsh things to you, but this morning I realized something. For 3 years, I watched you arrive every day with dignity, working without complaining, treating everyone with respect. You never lost your class, never became bitter. Now I understand why. It wasn't just that you had a different past. It was that you never stopped believing in your own worth, even when others didn't see it. If you have the chance to fly high again, do it. You deserve it more than anyone I know." Grace cried for the first time in months. She cried for the lost years, for the opportunities she had let pass out of fear, for all the times she had chosen the safety of invisibility over the risk of shining. But she also cried with joy, because she had finally recovered something she had lost without realizing it, faith in herself. She took her phone and dialed Heinrich's number. "Herr Müller," she said in German when he answered, "I accept your proposal. I'm ready to go home." On the other side of the line, she heard the smile in Heinrich's voice. "Willkommen zurück im Leben, Grace. Willkommen zurück. Welcome back to life, Grace. Welcome back." For the first time in 3 years, Grace Martinez felt completely visible. And it was beautiful. 6 months later, Grace Martinez stood in front of an auditorium full of businessmen, diplomats, and high-level executives at the Four Seasons Hotel in New York City. She wore a navy blue tailored suit she had chosen carefully, her hair perfectly styled, and a smile that radiated a confidence that had taken decades to build. It was the annual US-Germany International Investment Conference, and Grace had been invited as the keynote speaker to talk about cultural bridges in international business. But what excited her most wasn't being on that elegant stage, nor even the fact that her new salary allowed her to live with dignity and send money to organizations that helped women in situations similar to what she had lived through. What filled her most with pride was the presence in the front row of 3 people who had transformed this story of professional recognition into something much deeper, a story of found family. Heinrich Müller sat next to his wife, Anna, a warm woman who had received Grace in Berlin like the daughter they never had. Next to them, radiant in her wheelchair decorated with American ribbons, was Sophia, an 8-year-old girl Grace had met at the Children's Hospital in Berlin, where she now worked as a volunteer on weekends. Sophia had arrived in Germany for complex medical treatment, accompanied only by her grandmother, without speaking a word of German and terrified by everything around her. Grace had found her crying in the hospital hallway during one of her volunteer visits, and something in those frightened eyes had reminded her of her own loneliness when she arrived in a foreign country so many years ago. "Good afternoon," Grace began, her clear and confident voice resonating throughout the auditorium. "My name is Grace Martinez, and until 6 months ago, my job consisted of cleaning the offices where million-dollar decisions are made. Today, I want to talk to you about the hidden value that exists in every person and about how sometimes The most powerful stories are born in the most unexpected places. Grace told her story with an honesty that touched every heart in that room. She spoke of years of invisibility, of dignity maintained in silence, of the crucial moment when she decided to risk being seen. But above all, she spoke of what she had learned. That true success isn't measured only in professional achievements, but in the ability to create authentic human connections. During my first months back in Berlin, she continued, I felt professionally fulfilled, but something was missing. Until I met a little Mexican warrior named Sofia, who taught me that families aren't always formed by blood, but by choice and love. Sophia raised her small hand from the front row and shouted in German she had learned with amazing speed, Das ist meine deutsche Mama. The auditorium erupted in laughter and applause. Grace felt her heart fill to the brim. Sophia has taught me that giving a second chance doesn't just transform the one who receives it, but also the one who gives it. Heinrich and Anna Müller didn't just give me a job, they gave me a family. And Sophia didn't just find medical care in Germany, she found a home full of love where she can grow without limits. Grace looked directly at Heinrich, whose eyes were bright with emotion. The day I decided to speak German in that lobby, I didn't just change my own life. I started a chain of events that led us all to discover that the most beautiful families are the ones we choose to create, the ones we build with intention, care, and unconditional love. The audience was completely captivated. Grace could see tears on many faces, executives who probably had never considered human value beyond financial figures. Sophia will return to Mexico next month after doctors confirm her treatment has been successful. But she won't return alone. Heinrich, Anna, and I will accompany her to establish a foundation that helps other Mexican children who need medical treatment abroad. Because when you find a true family, your responsibility doesn't end with yourself. Grace paused, looking toward the audience that had remained in absolute silence. Each of you has the power to see beyond appearances, to recognize value in unexpected places, to build bridges where others see walls. Each of you can be someone else's Heinrich Müller, the person who changes a life with a simple act of recognition and respect. The applause was deafening, but Grace barely heard it. Her attention was completely fixed on Sophia, who had begun clapping with contagious energy, shouting in Spanish, "That's my German godmother, the best in the whole world." When Grace came down from the stage, Heinrich was waiting for her with a hug that lasted several minutes. "Ich bin so stolz auf dich, meine Tochter," he whispered in her ear. "I'm so proud of you, my daughter." And in that moment, Grace Martinez knew with absolute certainty that she had arrived exactly where she belonged, not just to a physical place or a job, but to a version of herself that had been waiting her whole life to emerge. A version that was visible, valuable, and deeply loved. 2 years later, on a bright spring morning in Berlin, Grace found herself at JFK Airport, waiting for a flight she had been anticipating for months. It wasn't a business trip this time, but something much more personal and meaningful. Beside her, Sophia, now 10 years old and completely recovered, jumped with excitement while holding a handmade sign that said, "Welcome Hope," in Spanish and German. Heinrich carried a bouquet of American flowers he had gotten especially for the occasion, and Anna checked the immigration documents for the third time. Hope Williams, the cleaning co-worker who had been Grace's only friend at the bank, was arriving in Germany with a work visa that the Bridges of Hope Foundation had arranged for her. After Grace shared her story publicly, dozens of working women had applied to the cultural exchange program the foundation had established. "Do you think she'll feel nervous?" Sophia asked in the fluent German she now completely mastered. "Surely," Grace responded, remembering her own first days in Germany decades ago. "But she'll be fine. We're going to take care of her, just like others took care of me." The Bridges of Hope Foundation program had grown beyond the most optimistic expectations. What had begun as an initiative to help Mexican children who needed medical treatment had expanded to include work exchanges, educational scholarships, and professional training programs. Heinrich had invested 2 million euros of his personal fortune in the foundation, but the real driving force of the project was Grace's passion for ensuring that no woman had to go through the invisibility and contempt she had experienced. When Hope appeared in the arrivals area, carrying a small suitcase and with an expression mixing terror and hope, Grace felt her throat close with emotion. It was like seeing herself 20 years ago. "Hope!" she shouted, running toward her former co-worker. The hug they shared lasted several minutes, both crying shamelessly in the middle of the airport. "I can't believe this is real," Hope whispered. "That I'm really here." "It's real," Grace assured her. "And it's going to be incredible. I promise you." Sophia approached shyly and extended the sign to Hope. "I also came from Mexico," she told her in Spanish. "And now I have 2 families, one in Mexico and one in Germany. You're going to have 2 families too." Hope knelt to be at Sophia's height with bright eyes. "And who are you, little one?" "I'm Sophia Müller-Martinez," the girl responded with pride. "Grace is my German godmother, Heinrich is my German grandfather, and Anna is my German grandmother. And now you're going to be my German aunt." The ease with which Sophia had adopted multiple family and cultural identities was for Grace the clearest proof that true love knows no borders or traditional limitations. During the journey to the apartment the foundation had prepared for Hope, Grace told her about her new life. She worked part-time as international relations coordinator for Heinrich's company, and the rest of her time was dedicated to the foundation and finishing her international administration studies she had started online. "You know what's the strangest thing?" Grace confided to Hope while they dined that first night in Grace's cozy apartment. "For the first time in my life, I feel I'm exactly where I should be. Not because it's perfect, but because it's authentic." Hope smiled, still overwhelmed by everything she was experiencing. "And don't you ever fear that it will all end? That one day you'll wake up and this will have been just a dream?" Grace reflected for a moment before responding. "At first, yes. But then I realized something important. This isn't luck, Hope. This is the result of years of maintaining my dignity, of continuing to grow in silence, of being ready when the opportunity came. And above all, of having the courage to be seen when the moment arrived." 3 months later, Grace received a call that filled her with deep satisfaction. It was Robert Sterling, the director of the bank where she had worked. "Grace," he said, with a voice that sounded very different from the condescending one she remembered, "I wanted to tell you we've implemented a new program at the bank. We're conducting interviews with all our general services employees to identify skills and talents that might be being wasted." Grace smiled. "That sounds like an excellent idea, Mr. Sterling. We're calling it the Grace Martinez program. We hope you find that appropriate." Grace felt an emotion so intense she had to sit down. "I think it's perfect. I also wanted to tell you that Lisa, one of the cleaning employees, turns out to have a degree in accounting. We've promoted her to the financial department, and we discovered that Mike, from maintenance, speaks fluent Mandarin. He's now our liaison with Chinese clients." When she hung up the phone, Grace stood looking out the window of her Berlin office, watching the snow begin to fall gently over the city that had once again become her home. Sophia was at school. Heinrich was in a business meeting where he was probably telling Grace's story for the 100th time. And Anna was preparing the Sunday dinner that had become a sacred tradition for their chosen family. Grace took a sheet of paper and began writing her monthly report for the foundation. At the top she wrote, "Impact Report, March 2027. Under that title she noted, 47 Mexican children treated in German hospitals, 23 women participating in work exchange programs, 156 families benefited by educational scholarships. 8 Mexican and German companies associated with the program. One transformed life that changed other lives, which in turn changed more lives. But on the last line, Grace wrote something that wouldn't appear in the official report. I have learned that invisibility is a choice, and that when we decide to be seen, we don't just change our own story. We light the path for others to also find the courage to shine. That night during family dinner, Sophia asked a question that had become ritual. Grace, what's the most important lesson you learned? Grace looked around the table at this family she had built with intention and love, and responded, that we all have something valuable to offer the world. But sometimes we have to be brave enough to show it, even when we're afraid. And what happens if we're not brave? Sophia asked. Then the world loses something beautiful, Grace responded. And so do we. Heinrich raised his wine glass. To the courage to be seen, he toasted. To the courage to be seen, everyone repeated in unison. And in that moment, Grace Martinez knew she had found the answer to the most important question of her life. It wasn't about where she belonged, but about how she could use her story to create a place where others could also belong. The story had begun with an invisible woman pushing a cleaning cart. It had ended with a family built on the foundation that everyone deserves to be seen, valued, and loved exactly as they are. If this story touched your heart, leave us a comment with your country, share this video with someone who needs it, and subscribe to see more stories that remind us that hope still exists, because in each of us there's a grace waiting for the perfect moment to shine, and in each of us there's a Heinrich capable of recognizing and valuing that light in others. The world needs more bridges, more chosen family, more courage to be authentic. Your story also matters. Your worth also exists. And maybe, just maybe, your moment to shine is closer than you imagine. This story of transformation, chosen family, and recognition of human value reminds us that second chances don't just change individual lives, but create waves of hope that extend far beyond what we can imagine.